For this video, I want to discuss the new feature that Easy As added into the income section. If you have a look at the income screen now, you see that there's an additional column here for income categories. Up until now, you didn't have a way of categorizing income, although you could use the project group feature for that, the project management feature for grouping income. It does make it difficult if you're already using that facility for some other means, but you want to group certain bits of income further into only one or two groups. I know I'm not making much sense, but if I look at the expense area, under expenses, we've always had an expense category. It seems only natural because if you have a look at this, you can categorize your expenses in their categories. We didn't have that facility available for income because it wasn't necessary. However, now they've introduced it. So now you have an income category, and here you notice that I'm just using dummy entries here because I was mucking around with the system testing it out. So this is just all dummy stuff I've set up. I've created income categories, and if you have a look down the bottom here, you can create a create income category here, and here you can enter a new income category if you wish. Similar to the expense screen. If we have a look at the expenses again, you can obtain a categories report. If I print to print this report, you're going to see that it categorizes everything in their categories. So we've got phone, mobile repairs and maintenance, and if I had 50 entries here, they'd all be listed here, and then we'd see subtotals at the bottom for that particular category. And every category's got its own subtotals. Now, with income, you can do exactly the same thing. If I print this out here now, I've set up a heap of dummy entries. If I click this here, so you'll notice on the screen here that it's grouped 3 entries that were grouped under shipping. It's grouped them together, it's given us subtotals, and it's laid it all out for us. Now, obviously, you don't have to use the income categories column if you don't need it. It's not a mandatory feature. It was introduced because of the last few years, numerous users, time and time again, asked for this sort of facility to be put into Easy As. However, their scenarios in how they were using it, what they wanted, made it mandatory. And we didn't want to introduce another mandatory feature because then what happens to all the other clients of Easy As that don't require an income category? We've added something that is just going to annoy you. So in the end, we've made this income category usable if you want to use it. You can ignore it, you can use it, it is up to you. Same with project groups. You don't have to use them. Really, what's mandatory is everything back from here, back from this print icon here back. You have to put this information into the system. Anything here backwards is not mandatory. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. I want to give you an example of this because it'll make a little bit of sense. Okay, so it's pretty logical. If you have an amount, if a client's given you, if you've done a job for someone and you've received an amount, say you've received a amount from Mr. Smith and it was for a job that was for $120, for example. He paid you in cash. $60 of that amount happened to have been for materials, and another $60 happened to have been for labour, and you want to group these separately, you're going to have to put in 2 different entries, guys. One entry which is going to be your labour, and one entry which is going to be your materials. So I've got to assign one of these entries against labour and the other entries against materials. So that's the only drawback about using the income categories. You can't enter one entry and automatically have it split 2 different ways. It's not going to work. If you want to use this facility, because it's not a mandatory feature, you have to enter 2 separate entries. But we know that for those who need this facility, the extra 2 seconds to add an extra entry isn't really going to be that much of a nuisance because the benefits far outweigh an extra 2 seconds now. Okay, how might we use it with an invoice? I want to show that. if you have a look at invoices, let's say, for example, that, here we go, here's another amount here for $120. Let's say, for example, that Mr. Mad Max here has paid me $120 for the whole amount of that invoice. And in this example, you just do the same thing again. Let's say that $60 of that was for materials and $60 of that was for labour. You could send it to income, but the only problem is I can't divide that two different ways. If I click materials, there's no way of me saying $60 is for materials and then come back in and do $60 is for labour. However, because if I click done right now, it's going to assume that the whole $120 was for materials. The only way I can do this now is to make sure I have the partial invoices clicked on, and I enter my amount down here. Now I'm going to enter $60. Right, so $60 was for materials. If I click done, it's going to assign $60 against materials. So now I'm going to have to jump back in and quickly do the other entry. So we see the first entry here, $60 for materials. Now I can assign the other entry for labour and put in another $60. So now if I jump over to income, we'll see that invoice 7 has $60 for labour and $60 for materials. So remember, that's the only way you can do the two entries against an invoice. But I think it's self-explanatory. I think you would have already been aware of that anyway once you played around with the system.